Hi, and so it has been a momentous day in Parliament today. We finally had the Brexit deal, and without even knowing what the results were, I knew it had to be a really big day. There were five potential outcomes. You had, or as I thought at the start of the day, so the deal could get through. That was very unlikely, but let's say it did. Wouldn't matter how tight it got through, it would get through, and that'd be it. Brexit happening according to those conditions. Not that we know what the end game would be, because the deal isn't a final deal, it's a transitionary deal. Then there'd be the deal being defeated, but by a few votes. Easily the sort of thing that Theresa May could put more pressure on MPs, just bring it back again, it'd get through. There was being defeated by up to 60 MPs, which some people would think is too much, but Theresa May reckoned, no, I can live with that. I could persuade 30 more MPs to vote my way. Whatever, doesn't matter now. There was defeat by 100 votes, which was considered roundabout average, in terms of expectations. They think it's probably going to be defeated by about 100, and that is too much for her to simply come back with that deal again. And then the fifth possibility, I basically worked out as best I could, based on which way MPs said they were going to be voting. So I worked out how many Tory rebels were being fairly open about voting against it, and I worked out how many Labour rebels and how many independents were likely. And I worked out a defeat by a margin of about 179. I didn't believe it was going to be that high, because when it comes down to it, some of those I thought would think better of it, or differently of it, shall we say, from their point of view, better of it, and vote with the government. Because they did exactly the same thing when it came to the leadership contest. There were so many MPs, Tory MPs, saying, yeah, well, we need to get rid of Theresa May, she's the problem. But they didn't put those letters in. I mean, eventually enough did, but it weren't coming. So when it came down to it, they didn't really. And yet far more people, well, significantly more people, voted in the unanimous, I think it was, vote of confidence against her than put letters in to try and depose her. Just sort of shows they don't really want to put the name on it. Whereas this vote, the vote in Parliament, is open. There's no anonymity about it. So I didn't think it'd be that high. So let's have a look what actually happened when the results were read out.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes, order! The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock.
So, I reckoned 179 based on what people were talking about. Didn't think it'd be that high. Political commentators yesterday thought margin of about 100. 230. It was defeated by 230. Now, I've got a little breakdown. I'm not going to. I'll just read a few key things out. First of all, there's a thing on the BBC about this being the biggest margin of defeat for 100 years. So I can only guess that there was a bigger defeat in 1917. It doesn't mention that, but it shows you some large defeats. For example, in 1924, there was a large defeat by 166 margin. That's the largest defeat that it's got ranked here in the last 100 years. 230. Now, how that's broken down, there were 3 Labour backbenchers who voted for the deal, as expected. They said that already. There were 3 independents. Now, I only knew of 1 independent that was definitely going to vote for it. So there's another couple. Okay, they were always a wild card anyway. Voting against it was every single opposition MP, with the exception of those 3 independents and 3 Labour backbenchers. All of the SNP, I suppose, as expected. All of the Lib Dems, as expected. All of the DUP, as expected. Everyone. I suppose everyone else was expected. But 118 Conservative MPs voted against their own party on this. 118. I mean, without me even going through, the exactly who voted which way, that means both pro-EU and anti-EU Conservative MPs have voted against this deal. This is the highest stakes, the absolute highest stakes. Now, I've got an awful lot of things to talk about this, and this will have to come over in the next few days. But, I mean, what I really have to say here is you've got to think now what has to happen to Theresa May. She has been defeated by 230. She cannot hope to convince another 115. That's virtually all of those Tory rebels to suddenly back her deal. Her deal is now sunk. It's at the bottom of the ocean, rusting. It's gone. It has gone. You've got to think now what can possibly happen. Okay? So, the fact that hardline Brexiteers voted for this. Now, I do have to say, all of the people, you've got to bear in mind this. I know some people are not going to like what I'm going to say here. But if you look at all of the MPs that say they're for Brexit, not all of them actually are. You know, some of them are like, I'm not going to say which numbers, I don't know. But some of them are like Boris Johnson. Like Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg, two well-known Brexiteers, have both very different attitudes. Jacob Rees-Mogg genuinely wants no-deal Brexit. He wants the country to be knackered because he'll actually make a... You have rich people making lots of money in very poor countries. He can make money out of it. That's all he cares about. Boris Johnson, no, I'm not going to say he's a good sort. Of course he's not. But he was very pro-EU. A lot of people might be surprised about this. He was very pro-EU, spoke passionately on the subject, wrote pieces about it, then suddenly changed tack very late on in the referendum, the campaign, that is. And everyone knows why. His parliamentary colleagues know exactly why, on both sides of the divide. It's because he saw political opportunity. Because here's the thing. Like I've said before, the only way that for everyone that the splitting from the EU, the Brexit fantasy gets exposed is by it happening. Because some people can't look at realities and see what's going to happen. They can't extrapolate events. They just don't have that sort of abstract thinking process. So unless a thing happens, they don't believe it will happen. I can only imagine they get up praising the sun every day because they couldn't believe it's rose again. So the only way it gets exposed is by it happening. You know, a no-deal Brexit is the only way these people face up to the realities of what they wanted. Any other form, whether it's a form of Brexit, a softer Brexit or no Brexit at all, they get to carry on saying that. And there's a lot of votes to be made in that. There are a lot of votes to be had, not only in the party, because Boris Johnson wanted to be the leader of the party and therefore Prime Minister, but in the country, a lot of votes to be had from attacking the EU, but not actually leaving it, because then you are never exposed to these people. They never see the truth of it. So you can carry on doing that all your life. That was the plan for him. It was an absolute disaster that the Leave campaign won for him. Complete disaster. So some of the Tory MPs will be in that boat as well. Maybe they're in constituencies that are quite anti-EU and they feed on that and they benefit from pretending they're anti-EU when they're really not. However, I'm not saying that all of those people voted this deal down because obviously now this makes no Brexit much more likely. That's what people are saying. But of course, what politicians say and what is a different thing. They may see it as the only route to no-deal Brexit, which it is, because there was no way there was going to be no deal with May's deal, because you've got to bear in mind, although it was a transitionary deal, and in theory you could say, well, in most respects you could argue, we could still leave with no deal if we can't agree anything at the end of this transition period. The Ireland backstop puts a spanner in the works, because as people noted out, what this deal does... or did, because it's gone now, it doesn't exist. What it did, shall we say, is it meant that we couldn't unilaterally pull out until the EU were satisfied that we'd solved the Irish border problem. And bear in mind, if we try and marry up these two things, we don't want free movement across our border between us and the EU. At the same time, we need to keep the Irish border open. But that means having the border open between the UK and the EU. Do you know what I mean? It's completely contradictory. You can't actually have both. But at the same time, and some people will say, well, we'll close the border. We'll just have to have a border in Ireland. Well, then you can't have peace in Ireland, can you? I'm not going to say it would definitely turn to violence again, but let's be honest, it probably would. That was a key part of the peace process. So it's this contradictory nature that also meant there could be no compromise. But it also specifically means it doesn't matter how much, the government says they don't want the backstop in, and if it is in, not for very long. It doesn't matter how much the EU say that, doesn't matter how much anyone says that. And they're all genuine, by the way. None of them want the backstop. But they have to, the backstop will remain in place no matter what anyone wants until there's a solution. And if there is no solution, and quite frankly there isn't, surely, I know you always got to be hesitant saying there's no solution, because then some smart ass comes up with a solution. Oh, I was wrong then. But how can there be a solution to must have hard borders, can't have hard borders? Surely there is no way of resolving that without Northern Ireland splitting from the Union. But, that's just a silly way of looking at it, because a majority of people in Northern Ireland don't want that. A majority of people in Northern Ireland don't want war, civil war either. I don't know. But there is the situation as it is. No point in wishing it away. Absolutely no point in wishing it away. It is as it is. So, they might think, well, this is the only way to get the no-deal Brexit. But how are they going to get the no-deal Brexit? They know they're in the minority in Parliament. Theresa May could, when she goes to Brussels tomorrow, she comes back next week to talk to Parliament and say what her plan B is. She's got to say what her plan B is. Her plan B cannot be another vote. I mean, she could do that, but that'd be stupid. She knows she can't do that. So what's it going to be? And if Parliament don't like what she does, they've already shown that they can force the government's hand. They can force her to, let's say, if Parliament decided, well, the only way to solve this is another referendum. But one not written by a chimp. I mean, bear in mind, it was just a simple yes-no, because David Cameron, lazy bastard, just thought, well, no one's going to win it. Leave campaign can't win it. Of course we're going to stay in. But they ran such a piss-poor campaign. No, we didn't. So, it'll have to be written better this time. And it has to be understood that even if Leave wins again, which I've got something to say about that, but even if Leave wins again, then you've got to say what that means, because no one actually knows what the people wanted. Do you mean no deal? In which case, by the way, it's no UK, Or do you want the May's trade deal? Because you could still, I say it's dead, but, you could still offer that to the public. Obviously, an extension would be needed. And I know people have said, but there's elections coming up and then there's going to be no EU Commission for this amount of time. Yeah, sure, it'd be a long extension. It would be a long one, most of the year. And then we can see how people are going to react. But here's the thing from a Leave point, and I've talked about this before, about the fear of Leavers, why they don't want another referendum. After all, if there were another referendum, then, if they are convinced that the people want us to leave, well, they'll still vote to leave. Of course they will. I think two things. First of all, I think there'll be a bigger turnout because people now have seen the importance of it. People keep saying that 70% was a great turnout before. No, it wasn't. It was rubbish. It's just not as rubbish as it usually is, because people don't take it seriously. They took that more seriously than other ones, but not seriously enough. And here's my advice, by the way, if you're in the UK, and it is awkward on voting day, especially if you're busy with something else or it's really important. Do what I do. Register for a postal vote. You can post well in advance then. There's no issue about getting to a polling station if some emergency crops up and you're at work as well and all the rest of it. Do that. That's the best way. But yeah, so they also keep saying about, you must respect the vote. Well, I would say the last vote was actually to stay in the EU, because the last vote we had in this country was the general election. And you've got to look at it this way. The vast majority of MPs in Parliament are pro-EU. People voted for a largely pro-EU Parliament. What does that say? What does that say? So, and they've not been shy about it, and they've not been secretive about it. They've been perfectly open and honest. And then some people will say, but look at, all the parties in their manifesto said we're going to support Brexit. No, they didn't. The Conservatives did, and they're the ones who said they would even accept no deal. They said no deal is better than a bad deal, even though no deal is the worst deal of all. But they're the only ones who said that. No one else did. The SNP certainly didn't. The only referendum they talk about is the Scottish referendum. Liberal Democrats, didn't they? They promised to oppose it. You know, even Labour said that they accept the result, but they also said that they are committed to coming up with a deal that keeps us in the single market and the customs union. Admittedly, not a deal that keeps us in the EU, but I mean, even that, it doesn't say that they won't. It just says that they accept the result of the referendum. That's pretty much it. But as I say, it says they insist on us being in the single market and the customs union. So all that really is, if you do that and leave the EU, what are you actually doing? The only thing you're sacrificing is your power. At the moment, we have influence in the EU, a lot of influence. We've pissed a lot of people off since, but in terms of voting power, we've got quite a lot. And in terms of our economic might, we've still got a decent amount. But if we left the EU but stayed in the single market and customs union, then all that means is we end up paying more than we do at the moment, and we get no say. Well, that's going to look retarded, isn't it? But then if we have no deal, that looks even more retarded. But thankfully, the MPs are not going to allow that. They are not going to allow it. Theresa May now has to play ball or be forced by Parliament to play ball. So we need an extension. Doesn't mean we get granted one. The EU has to agree. The only way they'll agree, they won't agree for a renegotiation, obviously. They will only agree if it's with the intention of doing another referendum. I think they would agree to that. I can't know, but I can think of no earthly reason why they would refuse. I know we've pissed them off, but they have to believe us. The majority of the people aren't in that. I saw someone tweet something super interesting today, and I am ashamed to say that I did not think of this. Since the original referendum. So here's the thing. First of all, quite a lot of the lies have been exposed. I think that would tip it in favour of Remain. I believe that. I know it's obviously this is just my experience. I know an awful lot of people that said they voted Leave but would not anymore. And there have been a few people that don't want to say how they voted. And that can be an indication that either they just never want to say how they voted just so that they can speak, generally about these things and don't want people judging them based on what they voted on. Fair enough. But it's equally possible that those same people have got the same experiences and they now feel that they're in a community of people who do not want to go where we're going. So there's that belief. But here's another thing, and this was super interesting. I never thought of it. In the last couple of years, it's just over 2 years, of course. Unfortunate to say this, but there's been a lot of people die. The vast majority of those people have been the elderly, and it was generally the elderly. I'm not saying I'm glad they're dead, by the way, but it's generally the elderly that voted Leave. Okay, and we've had people suddenly reach voting age, and the young, generally voted Remain. So I believe if the very same people voted in the original referendum, that it would still be in favour of Remain. Not by a huge amount, but maybe. But the demographic has potentially also shifted. Only potentially to the tune of a difference of 100,000 or something like that, maybe, or 200,000. But that would be interesting. On top of it, again, I don't think it'd be a landslide or anything like that. It would be nice to think that, but if I was to say that Remain would easily win, then that would be me believing in unicorns riding the clouds and a pot of leprechaun gold at the end of everyone's bed. So I don't want to go into fancy world there. But yes. Now, so in terms of where we are, Theresa May goes to Brussels tomorrow. They're not going to. Obviously, they know the situation. They're not going to crack because no one's putting pressure on the EU. Like everyone thinking, oh, the EU will now crack. Why will they? No one is putting pressure. If their own business leaders, the only reason they could ever want to give us any concessions is if it's going to hurt them economically if they don't. The very people who would be putting pressure on them if it was going to hurt them economically are their own business leaders. Because this was the plan from the grand Brexiteers. Just sit on our hands, do nothing. Their business leaders will start putting pressure on the European Council and they'll have to come crawling to us with this fantastic deal where we get everything we want, even though it's contradictory. No, hasn't happened. Not a peep out of them. The only thing those business leaders have said is, we are disappointed to be losing the business, but the integrity of the single market is of paramount importance. Nothing can sacrifice that. So we have not had any discontent on the part of businesses in continental EU. Not a peep. So there is zero pressure on the EU. So it's complete fantasy thinking that the EU will crack. They don't need to. The people conducting these things are politicians and civil servants. They just need to do what they're told, you know, and no one's telling them to give us any concessions or renegotiate anything. So they won't. You know, Theresa May's just going to Belgium for something. I don't know. Maybe she likes getting her duty free. Who knows? But I just don't know. But anyway, next week she's got to come back with her plan B. She doesn't get several weeks like she wanted because Parliament stopped that. I actually thought she'd have to come back on Friday, but they're not sitting every day. I suppose that's it's 3 sitting days. I missed that. So it's next week she comes back, hopefully on Monday. I'm not sure it's Monday or Tuesday. But at some point next week she's got to come back with her plan B. What can that be? She can try and say, right, I'm going to put it up for a vote again. But to be honest, Parliament will just force her there and then if she does that, because it's got no chance. She knows it's got no chance. It's dead. She can say, well, you've tied my hands. There's no consensus for anything. Looks like we're crashing out with no deal. In which case, a few weeks ago, I'd have said, well, she can sort of force that. But now, with Parliament flexing its muscles, we know that's not going to happen either. Now, the number of MPs that are dead against that may not be quite the same ratio, but we know there's a majority that are dead against it. What's the third option? The third option is she can say, we're deadlocked, a new referendum is the only way to do it. She could say that. In the meantime, there is another little wriggle, though, because Jeremy Corbyn has at last called his vote of no confidence. That could muddy the water somewhat, because this is the problem. Throughout this whole process, both Theresa May, for the Conservatives, and Jeremy Corbyn have basically been pushing their party politics, which is disappointing. I have an allegiance to a particular political party, but this is not the time for party politics at all. The coming together, the cooperation at the moment in Parliament is not between the government and the opposition. It's between backbenchers of all parties. You know, they're the ones that are actually showing leadership at the moment. Jeremy Corbyn pushing for his general election. I don't believe he'll get it. I don't believe the vote of no confidence will work. If it does, that could make a bit of a mess of things, but I don't believe it will, because you'd have to be asking for almost all of the Conservative MPs to vote against their own party. Now, they've done it for the deal, but they're not going to do it because, apart from anything else, those Conservative rebels, they don't want the Conservatives to leave government, and they don't want a general election getting in the way of what is an important issue right now. So I just don't see it happening. But he's done it anyway. He's done it. So we'll see. But there's no point in me talking about the consequences of that, because until, you know, unless he wins that vote, we don't, there's no point even thinking about it. So yeah, we just have to wait till next week to see what Theresa May has done. But I have zero doubt. Parliament knows there is no middle ground, because here's the thing, right? You've got people on one side of the argument who say things like EU laws are bad, even though we came up with most of them and we voted for almost all of them. EU laws are bad. You know, movement, people in the EU being able to come and live and work here is bad. You know, people being able to travel around is bad. You know, all these things are bad. Okay? But there's people on the other side, the camp I'm in, who think all these things are actually good. European courts, good. Thank you. We want those. It's a check against the more corrupt elements of our government. The EU laws are brilliant. And remember, we come up with a lot of them. They're some of our best and most genuine laws. All right? The human side of us. You know, the ability to live and work is fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. Britain has always been, since before the Dark Ages, a melting pot of different cultures, people migrating. And I see no reason why we should suddenly become such a xenophobic country. It's ridiculous. It goes against 1,500 years of tradition. So I think all these are fantastic, and so do a lot of other people, and other people don't. So where's the middle ground in that? You know, where is the middle ground? There is no middle ground that satisfies. Obviously, there's no such thing as a middle ground that keeps both sides happy, but there isn't even a middle ground that satisfies both sides. The only way you can have a middle ground is to piss off both sides. And that's what May's deal is. that they don't want it. We don't want it. So there we are. We'll have to see later anyway. But we are facing a truly momentous moment, not just because this was defeated so heavily, not just because this is a crucial, obviously, staying in the EU, leaving the EU, crucial decision. But there is something potentially brewing, and I'm not saying it's likely, but it's plausible, and I've been thinking about it since last week. There is something potentially brewing that could actually change the face of Britain more seriously than do we stay in the EU or do we not? And that's what I intend to talk about tomorrow. But there may be other things that come higher in the priority, but it will certainly be sometime this week. Tomorrow, again, if we learn anything new, I may do a video on that. We'll have to see. But my intention is that I think this is going to be for tomorrow. And I think, not likely, but there's a significant chance of something that I actually wouldn't be in favour of, I have to say. But nonetheless, a seismic shift in UK politics. And it would at least be interesting to discuss. But there we go. That's the vote as it was today. A defeat to the government by 230 votes. Never seen the like in my life, of course. We've never seen the like in the last 100 years, apparently. I hope you enjoyed the video, at least found it interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, click the bell notification to be notified of further content, share with others who might also be interested, comment down below because I like reading those comments. And until next time, I'll see you later.